The wind was gentle that morning, rustling the golden leaves along the cobblestone streets of the old district. Nestled between a used bookstore and a vintage flower shop stood Maple & Co., a small cafe with ivy creeping up its brick facade and windows that always seemed to glow with quiet comfort. It was Amelia Rowe's favorite spot, tucked away from the noise of city life, where she graded essays, read poetry, and occasionally simply watched the world go by. But that morning, she wasn't there for literature. She was there because her mother had insisted, just one date, she had said. One blind date with a man described vaguely as normal, polite, quiet. Normal sounded safe. Safe sounded boring. And boring sounded better than betrayal. Amelia stepped into the cafe at exactly 10. Her blonde hair was tied in a soft knot, a beige scarf draped around her neck. She scanned the room, her heart sinking halfway at the thought of another wasted hour. Then she saw him. He was already seated near the window, a man in a worn gray coat, holding a paper bag in one hand and a book in the other. He looked up, smiled gently, and stood. "Amelia?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes, and you're Cal." "That's me," he replied. "I hope you don't mind. I got here a little early." She took the seat across from him, setting her purse down quietly. Everything about him felt unpolished. No fancy watch. His hair still slightly damp from the morning dew. His voice calm, unhurried. "You read?" she asked, motioning to his book. "Always keeps me out of trouble," he said with a small smirk. She smiled faintly but kept her guard up. Her last fiancé had also seemed charming, until he wasn't. They ordered their drinks. She, a chamomile tea. "He, a black coffee. I like it bitter," he said. "Bitterness takes time to appreciate, like most truths in life." She raised an eyebrow. "That's oddly poetic for a blind date." Cal grinned. "Sorry, occupational hazard." "And what exactly is your occupation?" she asked carefully, testing him. "I work with schools, in funding and support services. Behind the scenes mostly, it was vague but not evasive." She nodded slowly. Their conversation paused when he tore a piece of the scone he had ordered and leaned slightly toward the window. Outside, a scruffy golden retriever sat, tail wagging, eyes hopeful. Cal tapped the glass gently and held out the crumb through the cracked door. The dog took it eagerly and backed away. Amelia blinked. That was unexpected. He turned back to her and shrugged. "I pass him often." "He's always hungry, never greedy." She found herself smiling before she realized it. It wasn't much really, but it was honest, unfiltered. For the first time in a long while, she felt unguarded. "Most men I've met," she said slowly, "usually start by asking if I plan to switch to a private school where I'll earn more." Cal looked puzzled. "Why would I ask that?" She looked down at her cup, swirling the tea slowly. He leaned in slightly, his voice quiet but grounding. "You like what you do, right?" "Yes." "Then the money doesn't matter." Her eyes flicked up to meet his. No one had ever said it like that. She thought about the man she had almost married. Sharply dressed, endlessly ambitious, full of empty reassurances. Cal, by contrast, looked like he hadn't bought a new coat in years. Yet here he was, speaking truths she'd waited years to hear. He never once asked about her ex, or why she wore no ring, or why her smile came slowly, like it had to pass through several doors before reaching her lips. Instead, he just listened, and spoke only when he had something real to say. She finished her tea. He his coffee. Outside, the golden retriever curled up on the bench, licking the last crumb from its nose. When they stood to leave, Cal said nothing dramatic. "No, I'll call you. No push for a second date. Just a simple, 'It was really nice meeting you, Amelia. I hope your day is gentle.'" And somehow, that felt enough. As she walked back toward her car, Amelia found herself thinking, at least he didn't quote Rumi or steal lines off Tinder profiles. Then she laughed. A real laugh, the kind that felt like her own voice again. Maybe, just maybe, safe wasn't boring. Maybe safe was the beginning of something honest. In the weeks that followed their first meeting, Amelia found herself visiting Maple & Co. more often. Sometimes to grade essays, sometimes to read, mostly to breathe. It surprised her how often Cal appeared there too. Always alone, always with a book, sometimes writing in a worn leather notebook, sometimes just watching the world move by the window. The first few coincidences passed without comment, but by the fifth or sixth, Amelia began to wonder if the universe had a sense of humor, or if perhaps he was gently giving her the space to come closer. She never asked, and neither did he. But one rainy Tuesday afternoon, as she set her papers out across the window table and ordered her usual, she turned to the barista with a smile. "If he comes by today, let me cover his coffee." The barista raised an eyebrow. "You mean the guy with the book and the coat that looks like it's been through 100 winters?" "That's the one. Anything special written on the cup?" Amelia paused, thinking. Then she said softly, "No. Just tell him it's from someone who appreciates quiet company." She never admitted it out loud, but something about Cal's presence calmed her in ways she didn't yet understand. He never flirted, never pushed, never asked for more than she was ready to give. And that, strangely, made her want to give more. One afternoon, as gray clouds rolled across the sky and the streets began to glisten, Amelia stood outside the cafe waiting for the bus. Her umbrella had broken earlier, and she regretted not canceling a staff meeting that had run late. A familiar voice behind her said, "You look like you could use a small miracle." She turned. Cal stood there, holding an umbrella already dripping wet from the walk. He handed it to her. "Take it. I'll survive." Before she could argue, he stepped back into the rain with a grin, soaked but smiling like it meant nothing. It wasn't grand. It wasn't romantic in the conventional sense, but something about it made her heart tighten. A few days later, her mother mentioned the backyard fence had a loose panel. Amelia nodded distractedly, not thinking much of it. The next evening, when she came home from school, the panel was reinforced with new screws, freshly aligned. A small note rested in the mailbox. Loose screws tightened. Fence should be good for another year. He hadn't mentioned it, not once. Even when she asked if he had been near their house recently, he just smiled. "I go where I'm needed occasionally." When the school where Amelia taught held a book donation drive for underprivileged students, she hesitated for days before mentioning it to Cal. Not because she didn't want him there, but because part of her was afraid he might say no. He didn't. He showed up that Saturday in jeans and a faded flannel shirt, carrying a cardboard box full of gently used books. She watched from a distance as he quietly organized, carried, sorted, even helped a shy student pick out their first novel. When another volunteer asked what he did for a living, Cal smiled. "I'm in education, just not the flashy kind." That afternoon, as Amelia packed away the last few donated books, a fellow teacher leaned over and whispered, "So who is that guy?" "Who?" Amelia asked. "The one who follows you around like a well-behaved shadow and fixes fences in his spare time?" Amelia laughed softly. "He's just someone who keeps showing up." Her colleague tilted her head. "You don't look like you want him to stop." Amelia didn't reply, because she didn't. Later that night, curled up with Buster on the couch and a mug of tea warming her palms, she found herself thinking about the little things: umbrellas, fence screws, book boxes, things that didn't scream love but whispered something just as powerful. Not a single grand gesture, no fireworks, just a steady presence. And maybe that was the kind of love that stayed.